It is great to be with you. My name is Marshall, and every other Sunday I'm sitting where you are enjoying the worship, and appreciate the worship that we do have here at Valley View. Most Sundays it's high energy worship. I appreciated relaxed worship today. It was just a bit more peaceful, and that is very appropriate to our topic today. For the last 3 Sundays we've been focusing on themes related to Advent. And the word Advent just means the arrival. And so it was. We've been preparing for the recognition of the arrival of the Christ child, and we looked at hope, we looked at joy, we looked at love, and today we're looking at peace. And peace, to me, is one of the more challenging of the Advent themes because there's so precious little of it in our world today. The shepherds heard the angels singing outside of Bethlehem on that Christmas night, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men," which is a nice sentiment, but where is it? The prophet Isaiah prophesied in Isaiah chapter 9 that a virgin would conceive and bear a son who would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and we're going to be looking today at the peace that Jesus brings, but oh my goodness, there are all sorts of things that disturb the peace, that prevent the peace from being completely experienced. What we experience instead is conflict, anxiety, fear, and dread all too often. Well, there's lots of things that work against peace. Let's just touch on a couple of them. To use the language, wars and rumors of wars. Even since the time of Jesus, there has barely been a generation that didn't have wars or rumors of wars. Today, even as we speak, there's war between Russians and Ukrainians. There's war between Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah. Until a couple of weeks ago, there was war in Syria, Somalia, Sudan, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Yemen. There are gang wars in Haiti and Mexico. And in just my lifetime, the United States has been in a Cold War with the Soviet Union with the threat of nuclear catastrophe. Then there were shooting wars in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan and an ongoing war on terror. Closer to home, we know that violence shatters peace. And just this past week, there was a shooting that left 3 dead in a Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin. So violence disturbs the peace. In the Bible, the word peace, however, means more than just an absence of war and hostility. The Hebrew word is shalom. The Greek word is eirene. And both shalom and eirene, the Old Testament word, New Testament word, mean more than absence of hostility. It means wholeness. It means safety. It means health. It means well-being. So the greetings of shalom and eirene can be a blessing. When you meet somebody, you're wishing them well. May they experience serenity as well as absence of hostilities, inner and outer. Well, there are lots of things that can raise anxiety and destroy our inner peace. And let me just acknowledge a couple of those. This next month here at Valley View, we're going to be starting care and recovery groups for people experiencing different kinds of stressors that can complicate peace. We're going to be starting a group for those who've experienced grief in the past year, for those who've experienced divorce, others who are experiencing financial stresses, addictions, stresses in marriage, or the stresses that come with being a long-term caregiver for someone with special needs. Health issues can shake our peace. A year ago at this time, I was one of those. I was involved in a silly accident that left me with a nasty infection in my foot. And I had to be hospitalized, and the there were wound care people involved, there were antibiotics people involved, the cares of doctors and other medical professionals. And for 9 days, I was pumped full of antibiotics, and the doctors came by to, give me the good news that if this infection spread to my blood or to my bone, they would have to take my foot. I was not feeling particularly peaceful at that moment. I'm fond of my feet. I like my feet. I was not willing to give one of them up peacefully. Well, I'm happy to say that after 5 months, yes, 5 months, the antibiotics and the doctor's care did their thing, and I am now wearing matching shoes. In the 60s, there was a peace sign. It went something like this. Well, for me, the peace sign is not this. The peace sign is matching shoes. And so that is a wonderful sign of peace. But there are times when we have to admit we don't experience peace, either outer peace or inner peace, because there are things that seem to interfere with that. And we are going to be looking at that today and the kind of peace that God has in mind for us. And let's go back to another Old Testament prophecy, to that same prophet Isaiah, that describes a peace that we can only anticipate. It's a peace that we can look forward to because we haven't experienced in its fullness yet. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. Now, most of you are saying, okay, time out. What are you talking about? Jesse was the father of David. David was the most famous king of Israel. In some ways, the peak of Israel's power and prominence was in the times of King David and his son Solomon. But a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, and his branch will bear fruit. Now, we need to understand, so what's the stump of Jesse? Well, when Isaiah wrote this, Israel was under attack. There was the superpower of they were the Assyrians. This was 700 BC. The Assyrians created an empire. They attacked the nation of Israel. In fact, they defeated and deported 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. These came to be known as the lost tribes of Israel because they disappeared from history. They were exiled, they were deported, they were assimilated into other parts of the Assyrian Empire, and as far as we know, they've disappeared, gone from the scene. 100 years later, empires rise and empires fall. 100 years later, the Assyrians themselves were defeated by the Babylonians. The Babylonians weren't content just with taking over the Assyrian Empire. They came and they attacked what was left of Israel, the 2.5 tribes of Judea. And they didn't deport and make these 2 tribes disappear, but they exiled them. They took the leading citizens to Babylon, and for 70 years, the nation of Judea the leadership was gone and it had been exiled. And during that time, the Davidic king, the tree of Jesse became a stump. The kings in the line of David disappeared. There was no longer a king who was a descendant of David on the throne in Israel, and hasn't been to this day. The Davidic line was apparently gone. But Isaiah said, the stump may be gone, the tree may be cut, maybe even dead, but it's not completely. There is still life in the stump. And as you see in the picture, we even here in Colorado know that from stumps, sometimes a sapling can arise. And that's what Isaiah was talking about in his prophecy here about the coming peace. He goes on from there, and he's talking about the Christ child here, because we will recognize in his prophecy that he's talking about the Christ child, but not just the Christ child, more than that. Take a look at these, read these words carefully along with me. We're talking about the shoot that comes out of the stump of Jesse. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. Isaiah is using Hebrew poetry, and Hebrew poetry is poetry not because it rhymes, but because it says the same thing over and over with different words. So he's saying the same thing about this stump of the root of Jesse, Jesse the father of David, and the Spirit of the Lord is on him, and this Spirit is one of wisdom and understanding, counsel and of might, knowledge and fear of the Lord. These are all different ways of describing this shoot. This is a prophecy about the first advent, the coming of the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, who lived a perfect life, a life of truth and grace and compassion. And even though he lived life the way life was supposed to be lived, he was crucified. He was punished, and he bore the debt for the sins of mankind, of you and of me, and provided a way of salvation. But guess what? The prophecy isn't over there. That's an essential part of it, but it goes on from there to describe it. A time of reconciliation with God that we can know inwardly now, but we sure don't experience it externally. Isaiah 11, verse 3. He will judge not by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy, with justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. Whoa, okay, whoa, starting to get nervous here. Something's going on externally here that Jesus is going to be in charge of. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. We're talking about something that hasn't happened yet, but is going to happen. It's called Judgment Day. Jesus was known not just for what he could see with his eyes and hear with his ears, but he knew what was in the hearts of men and women. He could see the invisible. He knew what was true and what was not true. He knew what was fact and what was fake news. He knew what was false and what was genuine. And his decisions will be based on what is true and absolutely accurate. Before this peace on earth is established, there will be judgment, which will remove, even eliminate evil and evildoers. He will eliminate liars, those who abuse and bully, traffickers, predators, and the cruel. Those who choose to refuse to trust in Jesus' death on their behalf will be removed. And Christ's first advent is going to be different from his second advent when he comes as a child and when he comes as judge. Two advents here. And Isaiah's prophecy describes both of them in one prophecy. Christ's first advent opens the door for us to be reconciled with God. When he comes the second time, he will usher in the new heavens and the new earth, and we will experience outwardly what we can only experience inwardly at this time. That world is going to be a very different world when Christ comes to reign and rule as king and as judge. So much so that it's hard to conceive what true peace, what complete peace, what external peace is. It boggles our imaginations, but let me try to see if we can put this into words. After the judgment, and Isaiah's prophecy continues, the wolf will live with the lamb. Huh? Wolves were introduced into Colorado a couple of years ago, and guess what? The livestock ranchers were not happy about it. Presence of wolves usually does not mean peace for cattlemen. Here, the wolf will live with the lamb. Ooh, those sheep farmers, how can they be happy? Isaiah says peace will mean the wolf and the lamb will be able to peacefully coexist. The leopard will lie down with the goat. That's not likely these days. The calf and the lion and the yearling. The yearling is what the Bible also calls the fatted calf. It's a year-old calf that has eaten for a while. A calf and a lion and a fatted calf will be together, and a little child will lead them. Let me tell you a story. My wife Susan was raised on a farm in Kansas. They had, for a time, they had sheep. And Susan's job as a little girl was to go call the sheep back in from the pasture at the end of the day and lead them to the pens where they'd be safe from the coyotes and the other predators. And she could do that as a 9 or 10-year-old. Wasn't a big deal. But one day she went out to the pasture and she saw the sheep, and there was a little bridge over a little creek that they usually came, and she called, and the sheep, which usually came readily and followed her to the pens, were not coming. She couldn't figure out why. They were gathered on the other side of the creek, but they weren't coming across. What's going on? She got a little closer. She saw that there was a large snake coiled on the bridge, and the sheep were not about to cross that bridge. So little child could not lead them then. She went back to the house, got her dad, and Henry Jansen was a stout German Mennonite farmer who wasn't about to let a little thing like a snake stop his sheep from coming back in the pens. And he went out there with a shovel, and the sheep walked by pieces of the snake as they came back to the pen. Well, in the peace that is to come, a little child would be able to lead them, and the message of this piece is that, message of this prophecy is that in the age to come, there's going to be no predators, no prey, no fear. We have a hard time imagining that today just because that is so different from the world we exist in. But Isaiah's prophecy doesn't stop there. It goes on. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together. What do we know about young bears? Mama bear is usually around, and Mama bear is not happy if anybody threatens baby bear. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The carnivore will live on a plant-based diet. Wow! What's going on there? The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. We don't have cobras and vipers in Colorado, but what do we have? Rattlesnakes. And I know at least 2 individuals here in Valley View's congregation, am I right, Todd? Am I right, Josie? Who've had close encounters with rattlesnakes, and is only the anti-venom serum that allowed them to continue to be with us. You know, it is not a casual thing to play near a poisonous snake's den. After the second advent, the infant will play near the cobra's den, and a young child will put its hand into the viper's nest, and it goes on, and they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. Venomous snakes will not be a threat in the age to come. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, this isn't just intellectual theology, knowledge of the Lord. Knowledge of the Lord is knowing God face to face, right here, right now. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the people. The root of Jesse, meaning the Christ child, who we got to know just a little bit in his first advent. We will find out what he was really all about when he comes again. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be, I love this word, glorious. Glory be when we live in that world with that complete peace. Normally, nature is, as Alfred Lord Tennyson put it in his poem, nature is red in tooth and claw. Nature is eat or be eaten. That's the world that we have come to know. But in the world to come, it will be harmonious, not adversarial. No longer eat or be eaten, but it will be the restoration of the creation to its unfallen condition. Peace, serenity will characterize the new heaven and the new earth in a way that it's hard for us even to think about. Knowledge of God means experiencing God face to face, which reverses the alienation and the separation that happened when sin entered the world after Adam and Eve. There's a book that C.S. Lewis wrote, part of the Chronicles of Narnia. It's called The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And there is a scene in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader where the characters get on the ship and they're sailing away from Narnia. They're sailing to the utter east. I guess I should point over here. To the utter east. They're going east through the seas to the place where the sun rises, and they recognize that this is Aslan's country that they're going to. It's a country like no other, where Aslan lives. And as they get closer and closer, the passengers on the ship realize that they have less need, less desire to eat or to sleep or even to talk. The sun appears closer than ever, and one of the characters, Reepicheep, jumps overboard into the water and tells everyone that he is amazed that the water is both sweet and drinkable. It's fresh water, it's not salt water, and it's pleasing to the taste. Another character tastes it and says, "This is more like drinking light than drinking water." Drinkable light, something that we can sort of imagine, but it's something we've never experienced before. And sometimes we're tempted to think that heaven, life with Jesus in the age to come, is going to be mostly like earth, only a lot longer. We're going to be worshiping forever and ever and ever. And some of us think if that's, I love worship services, but, an hour and a half is about my max. Longer than that, I'm going to start, getting restless. This is telling us that no, there's going to be some continuity from earth to the age to come. But the discontinuity, the differences, are going to be a lot more significant than the similarities. Let's look at this life of peace that's as different as drinkable light and lions and fatted calves being led by a child together. Let's look at what other parts of the Bible, the words they use to describe this. And I'd suggest if you're interested, you might want to take a photo of this slide. I went through all of these references. We don't have time to read them all this morning. But here is what God's kingdom, when it comes in its fullness, will be like. There will be no more sorrow, tears, pain, or death. It's hard to imagine a world like that. There will be no more night. There will be no more evil. There'll be no more curse. Sometimes we're tempted to forget that we are living on a cursed planet. It's a planet that is going to be coming to an end in the form it is now. The seeds of its own destruction have been planted, and we see some of those seeds of destruction being harvested. But in the kingdom to come, there we will serve God. We will reign with Christ forever. Where will we reign and how will we reign? I don't know. Will each of us have a planet to govern? I don't know. But the difference between that age and the age we're in right now are pretty significant. We will live in a place prepared for us by Christ himself. We will have perfect knowledge, even without AI. We will know mentally, we will know experientially with perfect knowledge. We will be reunited with the redeemed of all time. Moses, Paul, the apostles, Jesus himself, we will be in their presence as well as the redeemed from throughout history. We will have glorified bodies with powers and abilities beyond our imagination. I don't know what that means, but maybe, can we fly? I don't know. We won't age? Amazing. our bodies not get tired? What? Unbelievable. Drinkable light indeed. It's hard to imagine such a world and such profound peace. We're still tempted to say, I'm not sure I really fit in there. I don't think those conditions sound like something that's realistic. Well, one of my first bosses when I worked in Chicago in publishing, his name was Joseph Bailey, and he was a respected author and speaker on the subject of death and what happens after that. He wrote a book called The Last Thing We Talk About, and he wrote of the difficulty that we have when we try to understand the realities of the life to come. Let me just read a portion of that book. He said, "I can't prove the existence of heaven. I accept its reality by faith on the authority of Jesus, who said, 'In my Father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place for you.'" And then Joe uses an analogy that I really appreciate. He said, "For that matter, if I were a twin in the womb, I doubt that I could prove the existence of Earth to my twin. He would probably object that the idea of an Earth beyond the womb is ridiculous, that the womb is the only world that we'd ever know. If I tried to explain that Earthlings live in a greatly expanded environment, we don't have to be cramped in the worlds to come, the twin in the womb would say, 'Impossible. Every time you move, I get jostled. That's just the way it is. That's reality.' But Joe says, if I tried to explain that Earthlings live in a world where they breathe air, he would even be more skeptical. 'No, the only world I know is, fetuses live in water. That's the way it is. That's the way it always will be. Who would imagine being able to live in a universe of air? Such a transition is impossible. It would take birth to prove Earth's existence to a fetus. Little pressure, a dark tunnel, a gasp of air, light, and the whole world beyond. Grass, lakes, the ocean, horses. Could a fetus imagine what a horse is? Never. Dribbling a basketball. What? That's inconceivable to a fetus. Running, walking, surfing, ice skating, with enough room that you don't have to shove, and a whole universe beyond. For a fetus, it's literally inconceivable. You and I are now in a womb of a place called Earth, a fallen, cursed planet. God has spoken to us. God has revealed a bit of what is and what is to come, but it's hard for us to imagine what that peace, that lasting peace, is going to be like. For the tired, it's a place of rest. For the sorrowing, it's a place where God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. It's a place where there will be no more pain, or war, or greed, or falsehood, or evil of any kind. It's a place of total shalom, peace, fulfillment. As the psalmist put it in Psalm 16, "In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." This is peace. That's what we have in front of us. That's what we're looking forward to. That's the peace that the second advent promises. In the meantime, we're between advents. We're in a time between the first advent and the second advent. How are we to live now, knowing what we know about what Christ came to earth and did, and what we can look forward to when Christ comes as King and we live face to face in his presence? What do we do with the circumstances we're in now that disrupt our peace, that disturb our tranquility, our serenity? What do we do? Well, the Apostle Paul offers some words that I think give us some guidance as to how we're supposed to live in this in-between Advent time that we're in. He says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." I say it again, rejoice. We rest assured that we are on the way to the place that Jesus is preparing for us, even if we haven't experienced it yet. "Let your gentleness be evident to all." Oh, I love that. Are Christians known for their gentleness? One day they will be. We should start practicing now for what is going to be most true of us in the second advent. Most of us, I'm out of practice on that. I need to practice that a whole lot more. Let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. Oh, and how anxiety tempts me daily to fret, to worry, to struggle with what's going to happen tomorrow that is out of my control. But in every situation, Paul says, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. We know that things aren't the way we would want them right now, right here, right now. There are needs, there are things that are wrong. There are deficits in our life. There are things that we need in order to make it through another day. Bring those requests to God, but make sure that your reality is more than just your request. Your reality is also being aware of the things that are worth thanking God for too. Try to recognize all of reality, not just the narrow portion that dominates our thoughts at this moment. Present your request to God and then trust Him. This is the key. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. We can't explain what it means to trust that God is for us even when circumstances are against us. But that is what life between the Advents is about. And the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. We can trust God for our salvation. We can trust God for our life in this present world, and we can trust God for the future and where it's heading in between. This means remembering both Christ's first advent and his second. Let me close with, I teach history over at Denver Seminary, and it's hard for me to get through a sermon without one lesson from history. Let me show you a picture of this gentleman. On the left is this gentleman as a younger man. On the right is the picture of this gentleman on the not so young. His name is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He was a poet back in the mid-1800s. He taught at Harvard. He knew multiple languages. He translated lots of literature from other languages into English. He also wrote some poetry of his own. One of his poems, well, this is a little test for you. I'm going to be interested to see how many of you can complete this line. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of... Yes! There are some history lovers in here. Yeah, that's great. He wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. He wrote Evangeline. He wrote the Song of Hiawatha. A number of poems back in the day when there were no screens and poetry was entertainment in the 1800s. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow had a fascinating life. You'd think that an academic who was writing poetry would be a man who was unacquainted with grief, but it was not so. His first wife died shortly after a miscarriage. He and his second wife had 6 children, but his second wife, I don't know if this was the open flame of a fireplace or a candle, but one day her dress caught fire and it immediately, erupted into flame. Henry was there. He went and got a rug and tried to smother the fire. The rug was too small. All Henry could do was to embrace his wife, try to put out the flames with his hands, and he ultimately failed. His wife died from the burns. Henry himself had hands that were permanently scarred. His face was scarred from the flames that took his wife, and he was never able to shave after that wound. His face was disfigured, and so fortunately he was able to grow a beard that concealed the burns. One of his sons was injured in the Civil War and eventually died of those wounds. But it was during that war, during the war between the states, that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow also wrote these words, which were soon put to music. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and mild and sweet their songs repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But then as he thought deeper, and I have to think that he was thinking of both first Advent at Christmas as well as the second Advent, he wrote another verse. Then rang the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace is coming even if we don't experience it right now. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow understood that life on this earth can't be fully understood when we lack peace. But he trusted in the coming peace of the second Advent. I hope you had a chance to get communion elements on the way in. If you did not, I think it's appropriate to, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand and our hosts can get elements to you. Jesus said some interesting things that suggest that he was very aware that when he was having his Last Supper with his disciples, he was aware both of the significance of First Advent and Second Advent. He said that, I'm not going to be eating this bread nor having the fruit of the vine with you until I come in my kingdom. Second Advent. He says we're going to be able to eat again someday, but that's going to be a very different circumstance from what we're going to be going through in the next day when he was anticipating his crucifixion. Jesus, the Bible says, took bread and he broke it. And I'd like to invite you to take the wafer that's in the container there and break it. Do what Jesus did with the bread. And I would suggest that there was some significance to him breaking that bread. He reminded his disciples that this is my body. Do this in remembrance of me. Remember me. And for us, as believers in 2024, we remember First Advent. We remember Christ's coming as a child, Christ coming to die on our behalf for the sins of the world, for the sins in our own lives. But we also remember that Christ died, rose, and is coming again. And so let's take this bread and let's eat it in two parts. Take one of these pieces. Take, eat, and remember Advent 1. Then let's take the second piece. Take, eat, and remember the coming Advent 2. Likewise, Jesus took a cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." Something is going to change in the next day when I die on your behalf, which is going to set the stage for not only reconciliation with God that's available now for those who place their trust in Jesus, but it's also setting the stage for peace that can be known not just internally, but externally when I come again. Take, drink, and remember.